The knock at 2 a.m. The night was heavy with silence, the kind that presses against the skin and fills the air with a strange weight. I had fallen asleep on the couch, the television screen casting its faint blue glow across the room. The muted murmur of late-night commercials blended into the hum of the ceiling fan, and I drifted in that half-world between dream and waking. The clock on the wall ticked quietly toward dawn. Then came the knock. At first I thought I'd imagined it, just the creak of the old house shifting in its sleep. But it came again, faint, deliberate. One knock, then another, weaker. The sound dragged me upright, confusion clinging to my thoughts like fog. I glanced at the clock, 2 a.m. exactly. No one came to my door at that hour. Barefoot, I shuffled toward the door, irritation mixing with unease. Whoever it was had better have a reason. My neighborhood was quiet, not the kind where strangers wandered in the dark. The third knock, so soft I almost missed it, sent a ripple through my chest. I opened the door with a sigh, half prepared to bark at whoever stood there. She looked like a ghost. Bare feet on the concrete, tangled hair clinging to her face, her skin pale under the yellow porch light. And then, the swollen belly, far beyond her 13 years. My heart stalled. It took me a second to recognize her. My niece. She stood there, fragile and trembling, her fists hanging limp at her sides. "Uncle," she whispered, her voice thinner than the wind. I need help." Her knees buckled before I could answer. Instinct kicked in. I lunged forward, catching her before she hit the concrete. The weight of her startled me. Light bones, heavy burden. Her head lolled against my shoulder, and I could feel the rapid flutter of her heartbeat. Fear wrapped around my chest like iron bands. Inside, I laid her on the couch, my hands shaking as I brushed her damp hair from her forehead. She looked small, too small, the way children do when sleep or sickness pulls them down. But it wasn't sleep, wasn't sickness. It was something darker. "What happened?" I asked, my voice breaking into a whisper. She didn't answer, only curled into herself, clutching her stomach as though shielding the life inside her. The storm of questions inside me roared, but I swallowed them. Not yet. Not now. I grabbed my keys, lifted her carefully, and carried her to the car. She barely stirred as I laid her across the back seat, her breath shallow, uneven. Every passing streetlight carved shadows across her face as I drove. The hospital was almost empty at that hour, fluorescent light flooding sterile white halls. I carried her inside, my voice tight as I called for help. Nurses swarmed around us, their faces shifting from confusion to something darker when they saw her belly. 13, one of them whispered to another. The doctor came, his expression hardening the instant his eyes fell on her. He examined her quietly, no wasted motions, no hesitation. Then he leaned close to a nurse, his voice low but urgent. Within minutes, police officers entered the room. Their presence was sharp, final, like the crack of a gavel. They didn't look at me at first. They didn't ask questions. The lead officer simply spoke one sentence, cold as steel. "She's pregnant. Very far along. And the father is likely someone close." The words sliced through me. Someone close. Blood. Family. My heartbeat froze. My breath stalled in my lungs. The room spun, yet my mind became sharp, cold, calculating. Someone had stolen her childhood, and I would find out who. They questioned her gently, their voices soft, patient. But she said nothing. Not a word. Her trembling hands clutched the sheets, her eyes fixed anywhere but on me. Fear, not confusion, clung to her. Fear of someone she knew. Not a stranger. Not chance. Her silence was a map, pointing not outward, but inward. I sat outside the room afterward, my head in my hands, the sterile hum of machines filling the silence. Rage burned hot inside me, but I buried it. Rage is noise. Noise is weakness. I waited. And then he came, my brother, her father. He stumbled in, clothes wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, smelling faintly of alcohol. Pretending to be shocked, pretending too hard. "Who did this?" he demanded, voice cracking, rising too high, too fast. His hands shook. His eyes never quite met mine. I watched him closely. every twitch, every slip. The doctor spoke, calm and clinical. She's been pregnant for months. I saw my brother's jaw tighten. His fingers dug into his palms. When the police mentioned a DNA test, his face blanched for the briefest moment. Denial clawed at me. He was my brother, blood of my blood. We'd shared childhood games, scars, late-night secrets whispered in the dark. The thought that No, I couldn't accept it. Not yet. But denial is a fragile shield, and cracks appear quickly. Memories surfaced, his drinking, his violent temper, the way his daughter never smiled in his presence. The silence that wrapped around her whenever he entered a room. Her fear, tonight. The truth whispered in the corners of my mind, growing louder, heavier. But I didn't speak it. Not yet. I sat in that chair, staring at the hospital floor, and something inside me hardened. This was no longer about family. It was about protection. I would wait. I would watch. And when the truth came, I would not look away. Because family isn't who shares your blood. Family is who you choose to protect from monsters. And if the monster wore my brother's face, then so be it. The hospital never truly slept. Its corridors breathed in a rhythm of their own. Machines beeping like distant heartbeats, the occasional shuffle of shoes against tile, the hiss of doors closing softly. Yet, for me, it felt like the world had shrunk to a single room. My niece lay under harsh fluorescent lights, her body small beneath the hospital sheets. White cotton swallowed her frame, but the bulge of her belly was undeniable, an accusation made flesh. I sat in the corner, silent, my fists pressed into my knees. The doctor spoke with clipped precision, his tone practiced, as though years of delivering unbearable truths had drained the warmth from his voice. "She's in her third trimester," he said, eyes flicking from me to the clipboard. "The pregnancy is advanced. At her age, there are serious risks." Risks. He didn't need to elaborate. The word alone carried weight, medical, emotional, moral. The police officers hovered near the door, notebooks ready, their presence like storm clouds gathering at the edge of the room. They weren't rushing. They didn't need to. Time was their ally. Evidence would come, stories would unfold. But for me, every second throbbed like a wound. I leaned forward, my voice low. Can the baby survive?" The doctor paused, his lips thinning. "We'll do everything we can for both. But the bigger concern right now is who's responsible." His eyes lingered on me, gauging, weighing. I nodded stiffly. "I want the same thing." Behind us, my niece stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, her gaze unfocused, drifting. When her eyes found mine, something flickered there, recognition, yes, but also fear. She turned her face away almost immediately. "Sweetheart," the doctor said gently, crouching beside her bed. "We need to ask you some questions. We want to help." The lead officer, a woman with lines etched deep into her face, took a step forward. Her voice was steady, almost maternal. "Can you tell us who hurt you?" My niece's fingers clutched the sheets until her knuckles turned white. Her lips parted, trembled, then pressed shut again. Her throat moved with a swallow, but no words escaped. Her silence screamed louder than anything she might have said. I shifted in my chair, every instinct in me aching to protect her. But protect her from what? From whom? The officer tried again, softer. "It's all right. You're safe now. No one here will hurt you. But we need to know." Still nothing. Only the faint rise and fall of her chest, the way her eyes darted anywhere but at the adults circling her bed. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't that she didn't understand. It was fear. Fear of someone she knew too well. The doctor and officers exchanged glances, silent communication passing between them. The woman officer finally stood straighter and spoke quietly to me. "Someone close," she repeated the doctor's earlier words. "It's almost always someone close." The sentence echoed like a curse. My mind spun. Close. Family. The word twisted inside me, jagged. The officers left to file their initial report, promising to return. The doctor scribbled notes, then left too, muttering about tests and preparations. Suddenly, the room felt cavernous, the fluorescent lights too bright, too cold. I moved closer to the bed. "It's all right," I whispered. My hand hovered over hers, but didn't touch. She flinched easily now, like a stray cat that had learned too much cruelty. "You don't have to say anything tonight. Just rest. I'll stay here." Her eyes flicked toward me, then away, but I caught it. A sliver of something that wasn't fear. Not trust yet, but maybe the beginning of it. I leaned back, exhaling. My chest felt like a locked box with pressure building inside. The door creaked open. My brother entered. His appearance was a knife in my gut. Hair disheveled, shirt untucked, eyes red-rimmed. His performance began the instant he stepped inside. "My God," he gasped, too loud, too fast. "What happened?" The girl on the bed stiffened, shrinking into herself. That was the first sign. The only one I needed. But still I watched. "She's pregnant," I said flatly. His face contorted with practiced outrage. "What? How? Who?" His voice cracked, stuttering. His hands shook as he ran them over his face, through his hair. He paced 2 steps, stopped, then barked. "Who did this to her?" Theatrics. I'd seen him play roles before in bars, at family dinners, when covering lies. This was no different. The doctor returned, holding a chart. He didn't waste words. "She's been pregnant for months." My brother's jaw tightened. His fists clenched. "And," the doctor added, "we'll be ordering a DNA test to confirm paternity. It's standard procedure in cases like this." That was when I saw it. The flicker. The flash of panic in his eyes before he smothered it. A twitch in his cheek. Most would have missed it. But I'd grown up with him. I knew his tells. My stomach turned to stone. "DNA," he repeated, forcing a scoff. "Of course. Do whatever you need." His tone was too quick, too eager, like a man trying to outrun a shadow. I said nothing. My silence was deliberate, heavy. I wanted him to feel it pressing against his skin. The girl didn't look at him once. Not once. Hours passed in fragments. Nurses came and went. The police returned, scribbling notes, asking questions my niece refused to answer. My brother kept pacing, wringing his hands, his voice growing hoarse from rehearsed outrage. But I stayed still, watching. In that stillness, I began to assemble a picture. Fractured memories, odd behaviors, subtle signs I had ignored. His drinking, his temper, the way she used to avoid sitting near him at family gatherings. Her quiet, brittle laughter that never reached her eyes when he was around. And her silence tonight. Her silence was an emptiness. It was a shield. A wall built out of fear. Not fear of strangers. Fear of him. The betrayal crept into me slowly, like ice spreading through veins. This was my brother. Blood. Childhood companion. Partner in mischief. Co-conspirator in boyhood rebellions. We had shared scars, stories, dreams. And yet, if the truth was what I feared, he had shattered something sacred. Not just her childhood, but the very notion of family. I gripped the arms of my chair until my knuckles ached. Rage clawed to get out, but I held it back. Rage would blind me, and blindness would let him slip through cracks. No, I needed to be precise. Cold. Patient. If he was guilty, I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't strike. I would carve the truth out of the shadows piece by piece, until there was nowhere left for him to hide. I glanced at my niece again. Her eyes were closed, but her lashes trembled. She wasn't asleep. She was listening, waiting. I leaned back, swallowing the fire inside me. Let my brother play his role. Let him think he still had control. Because I had already chosen peace. Protector, watcher, hunter of truth. And when the time came, I would not hesitate. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds in thin, pale stripes. It should have felt like relief after the night's chaos. But instead, it only sharpened the edges of my unease. The room smelled of antiseptic and fear, the kind of fear that clung to walls long after voices fell silent. My niece lay motionless, her face turned toward the window. Her belly rose beneath the thin sheet, a grotesque reminder that the childhood she should still be living had been stolen away. I wanted to reach for her hand, but I didn't. Touch was complicated now. It might comfort, or it might frighten. I couldn't risk either. My brother sat slumped in a chair across the room. He hadn't slept. Dark crescents bruised his eyes. His clothes were wrinkled. His hair greasy. To anyone else, he might have looked like a grieving father. But I knew the difference between grief and performance. I had grown up with him. I had seen him lie to teachers, to girlfriends, to employers. His face an ever-changing mask. And still, denial gnawed at me. This was my brother. We had shared a bedroom as boys, whispering late into the night about dreams too big for our small town. We had stolen apples from orchards together, patched each other's cuts with clumsy hands, survived our father's temper with unspoken solidarity. Could that boy have grown into this man? Memory can be cruel. It softens what should stay sharp, blurs what should be clear. I thought of the way he had laughed when we were children, unburdened, genuine. Then I thought of the way his laughter had changed in adulthood, harsher, edged with something mean. The years had not been kind to him. He had drifted from job to job, always with excuses, always with someone else to blame. Alcohol had become his shadow, temper his second skin. And yet, family dinners painted him as the father trying his best, the man struggling under the weight of responsibility. We excuse him. I excused him. But now, every excuse felt like complicity. The police returned in the late morning, notebooks open. They asked my niece again if she could identify the father. She turned her face deeper into the pillow, her silence like a locked door. My brother stood, puffing his chest, spitting words. She's traumatized. Can't you see? Stop harassing her. The officers exchanged glances, their pens pausing mid-scratch. They had seen this before, I could tell. Their eyes lingered on him longer than necessary. After they left, he turned to me, voice low and urgent. This is insane. Whoever did this, when I find them. His words collapsed under their own weight. He couldn't finish the sentence. Or wouldn't. I studied him. Every twitch of his hand, every dart of his eyes. He wouldn't meet my gaze for long. When he did, there was something behind it. Fear. Yes, but also calculation. He was measuring me, the way I was measuring him. Later, while he stepped out to make a call, I approached the nurse's station. My voice was steady, though my insides churned. I want to make sure the DNA test is done quickly. She deserves answers. We all do. The nurse nodded, making notes. Her eyes softened briefly as she glanced toward the girl's room. She's lucky to have someone who cares. The words lodged in me. Lucky. She was unlucky in almost every way imaginable. But maybe, just maybe, I could change that. When I returned, my brother was back in his chair, muttering into his phone. His voice clipped, sharp. I caught fragments. Don't call me now, not here, just handle it. He ended the call abruptly when he saw me. I didn't ask. Not yet. That night, after my niece had drifted into a fitful sleep, I sat in the hospital's empty cafeteria, staring at a cup of coffee gone cold. Memories came unbidden, sliding through my defenses. I remembered us at 12 and 10, building forts in the woods, swearing eternal loyalty. I remembered him standing up for me in school when older boys pushed me down. But then other memories forced their way in. The first time I saw him strike someone smaller, the way he laughed afterward. The girlfriend he'd left with bruises he claimed were accidents. The daughter who had stopped hugging him after the age of 8. The shadows had always been there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. Now I couldn't look away. I thought of her silence. The way she hadn't flinched from the police or the doctor, but she had from him. That silence was not just fear. It was knowledge. And knowledge meant danger. I made my decision there in the cafeteria, the hum of vending machines filling the void. I would no longer wait for the police to uncover the truth at their own pace. I would not rely on chance. If my brother had done this, I would find out. I would build a case so strong, so undeniable, that even his lies could not dismantle it. But I would need to be careful. Rage was tempting, but rage was messy. He would expect anger. He would not expect silence. Silence, I realized, was its own kind of weapon. The next day, I began to watch him differently. Every word, every gesture, every phone call. I volunteered for errands, signed papers at the desk, offered to bring coffee. Small acts that placed me close to the process, close to the evidence. When the opportunity came, I took it. A DNA test kit, sealed, clinical. One swab for her, one for him. Simple, ordinary, yet it carried the weight of revelation. He barely noticed, too preoccupied with his performance as the enraged father. He signed where they told him to, his scrawl jagged, careless. I kept my face neutral, but inside, something shifted. It had begun. The test would take days, maybe longer. Until then, I would continue to watch. I would build a quiet case of my own, piece by piece, shadow by shadow. Because family is supposed to be sanctuary. And if the sanctuary had been violated, then it was up to me to burn the rot out of it. That night, as I sat by my niece's bedside, I felt her eyes on me. When I looked down, she didn't turn away this time. Her lips trembled, but no sound came. It didn't matter. I understood. She was telling me the truth in the only way she could. And I swore to her in silence, I would not fail. The house seemed colder after that night, though the weather hadn't changed. Perhaps it was because I now carried suspicion in my bones, a weight that seeped into every glance, every silence, every movement in the air. The niece, her body bruised and spirit splintered, hardly spoke. She stayed in the guest room, wrapped in blankets, even when the day was warm, as though she feared her own skin might betray her. I told myself I would not press her for details, not yet. The truth would surface when she was ready. But still I needed answers, because a part of me screamed at the thought that my own brother, my blood, might be the shadow hovering over this child. So I began to observe quietly. At first, it was small things. The girl's body stiffened whenever she heard a deep male voice. If a knock echoed at the door, she would shrink into corners. She never let me close her bedroom door fully. At night, I heard muffled sobs, though by the time I reached her door, silence had reclaimed her. I found myself pacing the house after she slept, heart hammering, as though the walls themselves whispered secrets I couldn't yet grasp. One morning, while she bathed, I gathered her torn clothes into a bag, telling myself it was for laundry. But the sight of those threads, stained faintly, ruined beyond repair, made me freeze. My hands shook. It was then I knew I needed proof, not just suspicion. The hospital had taken some samples during her examination, but their report had been vague, careful, as if afraid to name the truth too directly. I contacted an old friend, a pathologist who owed me favors. Quietly, I requested that additional tests be run, tests that would trace the genetic fingerprints left behind. It was betrayal, in a way, to ask for such confirmation. A betrayal of my brother. But if betrayal was necessary to stop a greater sin, then so be it. Days bled into one another. While waiting for the results, I became a shadow myself, following trails, asking quiet questions in places where whispers lived. I spoke to neighbors, to the girls' teachers, to the pharmacy clerks who might have noticed unusual purchases. The pieces began to align into a picture too dark to look at directly. The girl had often missed school. She carried bruises she could not explain. Her father was known to drink heavily at night, his temper unpredictable. But none of these scraps were proof of the unspeakable act that now hovered like a phantom between us. Then came the day the envelope arrived. It was plain, no markings, no grand sign of its importance. Just my name on the front in sterile print. I carried it inside, holding it as though it were a shard of glass that might cut me open. I sat at the kitchen table, the girl asleep upstairs, and I stared at it for long minutes, the clock ticking like a judge's gavel. When I finally tore it open, the world shifted. Inside was confirmation. Cold, clinical, undeniable. The genetic imprint matched. The child carried her father's blood in ways she should not have. My brother's sin was etched into the very code of life. I dropped the papers, my breath gone. My chest felt hollow, as though someone had scooped out my insides and left only a shell. Rage surged through me, so sharp it tasted like iron. This was no longer suspicion, no longer whispers. It was truth carved in stone. I went to her room that night, knelt beside her bed. She stirred, eyes opening with fear, before she recognized me. You're safe here, I whispered, though I doubted my own voice. He won't touch you again. Her lips trembled. For the first time, she whispered back, barely audible. Promise. And though I was unsure how I would do it, though I knew the cost it might demand, I gave her the only answer I could. Yes. I promise. Outside, the night was silent. But in that silence, I felt the weight of war begin. I carried the papers with me for 3 days before I could confront him. They lay hidden inside my desk drawer, folded and refolded until the edges grew soft. Every time I touched them, I felt as if fire would burn through my fingertips. They were nothing more than words and numbers, sterile percentages on a page, yet they carried the weight of damnation. When I finally called my brother, my voice was steady. Too steady. Come by the house tonight, I told him. We need to talk. He chuckled lightly on the other end. Since when do we talk about anything serious, brother? Is this about money? About her. His voice lingered on that last word, and I felt bile rise in my throat. Just come, I said, and hung up before his laughter could twist my resolve. That evening, the girl stayed in her room upstairs. She hadn't eaten much, barely touched the soup I left at her bedside. She was fading, and every day she looked less like a child and more like a shadow. I wanted her to hear none of what was about to unfold. At precisely 8, I heard the sound of his car outside. The engine cut, a door slammed, and then the familiar, heavy tread of his boots across the porch. My hands tightened around the envelope. The door opened, and there he stood, my brother. Older than me by 3 years, but still carrying that same swagger, that same smirk that had followed him since youth. He looked around the room, noticing the stillness, the absence of laughter. You sound serious on the phone, he said, loosening his coat. What's this about? I tossed the envelope onto the table between us. Read it. He frowned, his eyes darting to the plain, white packet. With slow, almost careless hands, he pulled out the papers. His lips moved as he scanned the words. Then silence. His expression hardened. Not surprise, not guilt, but something colder. Finally, he looked at me. So, you went behind my back. The casual tone ignited something in me. Behind your back. My voice cracked like a whip. You've destroyed her life. Your own daughter. My niece. And you speak as though this is nothing but an inconvenience to you. His smirk returned, bitter, defensive. You think you're a hero now? A savior? You know nothing of what happens in my house. I slammed my fist onto the table. I know enough. I know what you've done. The tests prove it. She carries your sin inside her body. For the first time, his eyes flickered. Not shame, fear. A quick darting shadow, before he masked it again. You'll ruin everything, he muttered. Our name, our family, your reputation. You'll drag us all through the mud for the sake of one broken girl. The words cut deeper than I expected. One broken girl. That was how he saw her. Not his child. Not blood. Just an obstacle. She's not broken, I said softly, my rage hardening into ice. You are. The silence stretched. He shifted uncomfortably, his hand twitching as if to strike, then stopping short. The same hand that had caused her bruises. The same hand that had stolen innocence. At that moment, I knew there was no saving him. No appeal to conscience. No plea for redemption. The man I once called brother was gone. From upstairs came the faintest sound. The creak of floorboards. She was listening. I met his gaze, steady as stone. She will testify. And I will stand with her. The police already know enough. This, I tapped the papers with a single finger, is the final nail. His composure cracked. Anger surged in his face, red and twisted. He stepped closer, voice low and venomous. You betray me, you betray blood. No, I said, rising to meet him. I protect it. The room was charged, silence stretching like a held breath. Then, before more could be said, there was a knock at the door. Firm, official. Police. His head jerked toward the sound, disbelief spreading across his face. You called them. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. As the officers stepped inside, his mask finally shattered. He shouted, cursed, tried to lunge toward me, but their hands restrained him. iron and unyielding. From the staircase, she appeared, small, trembling, but standing. Her eyes met his as they dragged him away. For the first time, she spoke clearly, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You're not my father." The words hung in the air like a blade. He struggled, shouted, but her voice silenced him more than any chain. When the door closed behind them, the house fell into stillness. The papers still lay on the table, stained by the sweat of his hands. I picked them up, folded them once, and placed them back in the drawer. Upstairs, she waited. I climbed the steps slowly, my heart heavy yet resolved. When I reached her, she whispered only one word: "Thank you." And in that fragile voice, I heard both the end of a nightmare and the beginning of a long road toward healing. The night he was taken away, the silence left behind felt heavier than his presence ever had. It pressed against the walls, seeped into the floorboards, lingered in the air like smoke after fire. I sat in the living room for hours, motionless, staring at the closed door as though he might walk back through it. But he wouldn't. Not this time. Upstairs, she finally slept. It was the first real sleep I had seen in weeks. Her breath was steady, her body no longer trembled. Relief lived there, quiet and fragile, but it was there. I, however, did not rest. My body hummed with exhaustion, but my mind remained sharp. I replayed his face as they dragged him out, the twisting rage, the desperate fear, the way his eyes locked on mine, not as a brother, but as a man betrayed by his own blood. His last words to me echoed, "You betray me, you betray blood." But what was blood worth when it was poisoned? The days that followed were a blur of questions, paperwork, and reporters. His arrest made headlines quickly. "Respected family man charged in daughter's case," screamed one paper. "Father betrays his bloodline," another. The neighbors, once quick to greet him with smiles, now crossed the street when they saw me. Their whispers reached my ears, but I let them pass. Shame was his, not mine. He called me once from the jail. The guard patched it through to my phone, though I hadn't asked for it. His voice was low, almost unrecognizable. "Brother," he said. I didn't answer. "Don't let them do this to me. Don't let them destroy me." My grip tightened on the phone. I almost hung up, but some part of me needed to hear it, to understand the man he had become. "They'll tear the family apart," he continued. "Think of our parents. Think of our name. Do you really want the world to remember us like this? You could still fix it. You could say you forged the test, that you were mistaken. One word from you, and it all goes away." The audacity of it, his plea for my silence, his assumption that I would protect him, made my chest burn. "You buried yourself," I said coldly. "I just showed them the grave." His breathing hitched. He tried again, voice breaking. "I'm your brother." I ended the call. At home, she was slowly returning to herself. It wasn't quick. It wasn't simple. Trauma doesn't leave with the man who caused it. But there were small victories. She ate more. She began to step outside the house, sit in the sunlight, feel the air on her skin without fear. Once, I caught her humming to herself in the kitchen. Just a faint tune, broken at the edges, but it was music all the same. Still, at night, the nightmares came. She would wake with a start, eyes wide, breath ragged, clutching the sheets like a shield. I would sit with her until her breathing slowed. She never asked for comfort aloud, but she let me stay. That was enough. The trial drew closer, and with it, the weight of her testimony. The prosecutors wanted her to speak, to face him in court, to tell the truth of what he had done. When they told her this, she froze. Her hands shook. "I can't," she whispered. "If I look at him, I'll fall apart." I crouched beside her, my hand resting lightly on the arm of her chair. "You don't have to do this alone," I said. "I'll be there. Every second. He won't be able to touch you again. Ever." Her eyes lifted, wet but steady. "Do you promise?" "I promise." The day of the first hearing, the courthouse felt colder than any hospital I had ever set foot in. The walls seemed too white, the benches too hard, the air too sharp. He was led in wearing chains, his face gaunt, his eyes darting. Yet, when he saw me in the gallery, he smirked as if nothing had changed. But then she walked in. For the first time since his arrest, father and daughter stood in the same room. The smirk slipped from his face. His eyes softened, pleading, as if he expected her to run back to him, to undo the truth. She didn't. She kept her gaze straight ahead, never once meeting his eyes. When she spoke, her voice was steady, clearer than I had ever heard it. "He hurt me," she said. Just 3 words, but they broke the room open like thunder. The silence that followed was absolute. He shouted, of course. Claimed lies, manipulation, conspiracies. He tried to paint himself as the victim, as the man betrayed by his family. But his words fell flat. No one listened. Not anymore. I walked her out of the courtroom that day, her hand small and trembling in mine. Outside, the reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, voices shouting questions. I shielded her, guided her to the car. She leaned against me, exhausted, but when we drove away, she whispered again, "I'm free." And in that moment, I realized she was right. The chains were no longer hers to carry. They belonged to him now. The courthouse became a battlefield not of weapons, but of words, documents, and unflinching eyes. Every hearing pulled us deeper into the storm, exposing old scars and unmasking secrets long buried. I sat in the back every day, a silent sentinel. She sat near the prosecutors, her small frame dwarfed by the gravity of the room. At first, she was a trembling shadow, her voice barely above a whisper. But as days passed, something inside her sharpened. Each time she repeated the truth, how he hurt her, how the nights turned into nightmares. Her voice grew steadier. He tried to twist the narrative. His lawyer painted him as a hard-working father, misunderstood, framed by a jealous brother. They even dragged my name into it, suggesting that I was the one who had orchestrated it all, that my bond with her was suspicious, that perhaps I had planted the evidence. I felt the heat of 100 eyes turned toward me. Rage threatened to break through, but I sat still, hands folded. Truth needs no defense beyond patience. Lies burn themselves out. And burn they did. The prosecution unveiled everything I had gathered. The DNA tests, the receipts from cheap motels, the bruises documented by teachers and doctors, the bank records showing his hidden indulgences. One by one, the lies unraveled, thread by thread, until the man who once commanded rooms with his voice was left a husk, hollow and desperate. He shouted across the courtroom more than once, spittle flying as he called her ungrateful, called me a traitor. Each outburst only sealed his fate further. I remember the day she faced him directly. The prosecutor asked her, gently, if she could point to the man who had done this. The room held its breath. She looked at him, her father, the man who should have protected her, the man who had instead poisoned her childhood, and her voice rang out clear. Him. One word, one finger pointed, and he broke. His face collapsed into something ugly, twisted, a beast unmasked. The trial stretched on for weeks. Headlines multiplied, neighbors whispered, and the weight of shame bore down on the family name. Our relatives distanced themselves, some refusing to believe, others too ashamed to admit the truth. My phone stopped ringing. Invitations disappeared. But none of it mattered. My only duty was to her. At night, I still heard her cries in the dark. She would wake trembling, the courtroom faces still haunting her dreams. I would sit with her, a quiet presence, until sleep came again. We spoke little, but her hand sometimes reached for mine, and in that small gesture, I found my purpose renewed. The verdict came on a cold morning. The room was packed, the air heavy. He stood shackled, his once proud shoulders slumped. I could barely recognize him. The judge's voice was steady, final. Guilty. The word echoed through the chamber like a bell tolling at a funeral. He collapsed into his chair, sobbing, begging for mercy. No one answered. She exhaled, long and trembling, as though a weight had finally been torn from her chest. For the first time in months, I saw her shoulders straighten, her eyes lift toward the light seeping in through the windows. It was over. But for me, it would never truly be over. I had lost a brother. Worse, I had discovered that the man I trusted, the boy I grew up with, had been a monster hiding in plain sight. That betrayal carved something out of me, something I would never get back. Yet, as I walked her out of that courthouse, her hand clutching mine, I realized what remained. Family isn't the blood that betrays you. Family is the bond you choose to protect. And in that moment, she was mine to protect, always. The storm passed, but storms always leave wreckage. After the trial, the world did not return to what it was before. It couldn't. Too much had been broken. The headlines eventually faded, the courthouse emptied, and his name became nothing more than a caution whispered in dark corners. He was gone, locked behind bars, his shadow finally stripped away. But the silence he left behind was jagged, filled with wounds that no verdict could stitch closed. At home, she moved slowly through the days, as though relearning what life meant without fear at every corner. At first, she barely left her room. She sat by the window, staring at the street below, the light touching her skin like something unfamiliar. I cooked for her, left plates at her door. Sometimes she ate, sometimes she didn't. I didn't push her. Healing is not a command. It is an invitation. Weeks passed, and little by little, she began to step into the world again. One morning, I found her in the kitchen, pouring herself tea. She startled when I entered, then smiled, small, fragile, but real. "Morning," she whispered. That single word carried more weight than any sentence I had heard in months. Morning. A greeting, a beginning. From there, the cracks began to mend. She walked outside, at first just to the porch, then further, into the yard, her bare feet pressing into the grass. She started attending therapy sessions arranged by the hospital, sitting with women who carried stories not unlike her own. At night, she began to sleep longer, the nightmares easing into fewer, softer shadows. I wasn't untouched by the aftermath. People avoided me, some with pity, some with suspicion. In their eyes, I was not just the man who exposed my brother. I was the man who admitted to the world that monsters can grow in any home. Neighbors lowered their voices when I passed. Colleagues avoided my gaze. But I carried no shame, only scars. Sometimes I sat alone at night, staring at the framed photographs of my brother and me as children. Our arms slung over each other, laughter frozen in time. I wanted to smash the glass, burn the images, erase him from memory. But I didn't. Instead, I kept them as a reminder. Betrayal does not come from strangers. It comes from those close enough to wound you deepest. One evening, months after the trial, she sat beside me on the porch as the sun dipped low. The sky was awash in colors, bruised purple fading into tender orange. She sipped her tea, her eyes steady. "Do you hate him?" she asked softly. I thought long before answering. I don't waste hate on him anymore. Hate keeps him alive inside me. I let him die. She nodded, absorbing the words. "Sometimes I think I hate myself," she admitted. Her voice trembled. For not saying something sooner. For not stopping him. I turned toward her, my chest heavy. "No. You were a child. You were trapped. None of this was your fault. He chose his sins. You survived them." Her lips quivered, and for the first time, she let her head rest on my shoulder. We sat like that, quiet, watching the day fade into night. Healing did not mean forgetting. It meant learning to breathe again, to smile without guilt, to step forward without fear dragging at her heels. It meant knowing the past could not be erased, but it could be survived. And for me, healing meant carrying the scar of betrayal without letting it rot into bitterness. It meant accepting that I had not lost a brother that year. I had uncovered the truth that he had never truly been one. What I gained instead was something stronger. A new family, not built on blood, but on choice, on protection, on love that refused to break under the weight of darkness. One night, as I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me with eyes softer than I'd ever seen. "Uncle," she asked. "Yes. Thank you for choosing me." Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I simply kissed her forehead and whispered, "Always." And in that word, I sealed a vow, not just to her, but to myself. Family is not who shares your blood. Family is who you choose to protect from monsters. And she was mine, always. The house felt different after everything, quieter, lighter, but also emptier. The ghost of my brother no longer haunted the rooms, but the silence he left behind was sharp. It reminded us both that something was missing, something that could never be restored. Still, life moved. It had to. She began school again. I walked her there the first week, my hand steady on her shoulder. The teachers looked at her differently now, no longer just a child, but a survivor. Some whispered when they thought she couldn't hear, but she noticed. I saw it in the way her shoulders tensed. "Let them talk," I told her one morning as we crossed the school gates. "Whispers can't hurt you anymore." She nodded, lips pressed tight. And then, for the first time, she walked inside without looking back at me. That small act of courage nearly broke me with pride. At home, I worked extra shifts, taking on anything I could. Bills piled higher with hospital visits, therapy sessions, and legal costs. But I paid them quietly, without complaint. My sacrifices were invisible to her, and that was how I wanted it. She had carried enough burdens for a lifetime. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit at the table with the old ledger open, scratching numbers onto the page, trying to stretch money further than it could go. She would peek in from the hallway, her small frame lit by the faint glow of the lamp. "You're tired," she would whisper. "I'm fine," I always answered. And somehow, saying it made it true. Months blurred into a new rhythm. She joined a support group, sitting in circles with other children whose trust had been shattered by the ones meant to protect them. At first, she said nothing, staring at the floor, fingers twisted in her lap. But slowly, words began to slip free. Stories of nights filled with fear, of broken trust, of survival. One day, she came home with a drawing, a simple sketch of a tree, its roots thick and deep, its branches stretching wide. She taped it to her wall. "What's it mean?" I asked. She shrugged, but there was a hint of a smile. "Roots keep it standing. Branches let it grow." Her voice carried something I hadn't heard in a long time. Hope. And yet, there were days when the shadows returned. When she locked herself in her room and refused to eat. When old wounds bled through dreams, and her screams tore through the night. On those nights, I sat outside her door, waiting. Sometimes she let me in, sometimes she didn't. But she always knew I was there. I carried my own shadows too. I missed the brother I thought I had, the one who existed in childhood memories of laughter and scraped knees. But those memories were stained now, corrupted by what I knew. I visited him once in prison. Only once. He looked older, smaller, his eyes sunken. He tried to reach across the table, pleading for forgiveness. I sat back, arms folded. "You stopped being my brother the moment you touched her," I said. And I walked out. I never went back. Seasons changed. Winter melted into spring. She grew taller, stronger. Her laughter, real laughter, began to fill the house again. She planted flowers in the yard, bright bursts of color that pushed against the grayness of the past. One evening, as we watered them together, she said quietly, "Uncle, do you ever wish you had children of your own?" Her question startled me. I stared at her, at the way the fading light caught her face, no longer just a child, but not yet grown. "I have one," I said. "Right here." She looked at me for a long moment, then leaned against my arm. That was answer enough. The future wasn't perfect. Scars don't vanish. They stay, etched into flesh and memory. But scars also prove survival. And so, step by step, she built herself again. And I built a life around her safety, her laughter, her right to grow without fear. Because in the end, it wasn't about erasing what had happened. It was about ensuring it never defined who she was becoming.